Hello, Year 3. Yesterday you did some lovely work on conjunctions, writing about your heroes. And I did promise you that we were going to go over what conjunctions are to make sure you have a really solid understanding of them, because conjunctions are really important for improving your writing to the Year 3 standard and even improving your reading so that you can read fluently and with the right rhythms. So, before I go ahead and explain exactly what we're doing, we need to do our date and lie. So pencil and paper ready. If you're in Jade group, just like the last couple of days, you don't need to stay and watch this video. This is going to be quite a tricky one for you. So Miss Fernandez has done a slightly shorter version of a similar LI for today on her Amber video. So check the link in the description box below to go and watch that. And everybody else, if you're still with me and you're not in the Jade group, pause the video to write the date, 6th of May 2020, Year 3 Reading and Grammar, and our LI, which is to develop understanding of conjunctions. So pause the video. Okay, if you've pressed play, you should have written that down, and you should be ready to move on to conjunctions. Now, before I actually go into what conjunctions are, we need to understand the basic grammar that conjunctions relate to, and that's all to do with what we've been learning in the last few weeks. So in a second, I'm going to transport us to the whiteboard, and we're going to carry on the lesson there.
In the last few weeks, we've been doing a little bit of learning about clauses and sentences, and that learning is going to be important for you to understand what the point of conjunctions is. So let's recap some of the most important things that you need to know. First of all, do you remember what a clause is? A clause, in case you've forgotten, is any group of words that includes a subject and a verb. So it needs to have both in it. The subject is just the person or the thing that is doing the verb. And the verb, as you know, is an action. So, a clause could be just made up of two words. So you could say, I run. I would be the subject because I'm doing the running. And run would be the verb because that's the action that's happening. That would be a clause. However, you can also have a clause with lots of added words in, as long as you keep the subject and the verb in there. So you could say, every day I run through the streets of my town. There's lots of extra words in there, but the most important thing is we've still got the subject I and we've still got the verb run. So a clause is made up of a subject and a verb, and sometimes you could have random other little words in there, which I'm just going to imagine as random other things in there. But the most important things in black is the subject and the verb. Now remember that there are two types of clauses. The most important type of clause to remember is an independent clause. And I've drawn it as a man like this, standing on 2 feet, because the thing to remember about an independent clause is it makes sense on its own. It can stand on its own. For example, you could just say a sentence, I run. That makes sense. I'm not waiting for any more information. A subordinate clause is kind of like an independent clause because it still has a subject and a verb, but it doesn't make sense on its own. It leaves you waiting for more words or more information in order for it to make sense. For example, if you just say, when I run, it doesn't make sense. We're waiting for more information. So that means it's a subordinate clause, and I've drawn it without legs because that shows that it can't stand on its own. It needs help from a partner. Now we've talked about clauses, we need to remind ourselves how clauses relate to sentences. So I've got some pictures here to help you. Here are some options for some sentences I want to make, and I want you to have a think. Can these sentences exist? For example, can a sentence be an independent clause? Just an independent clause? Have a think. If you said yes, then you are correct. A sentence can just be an independent clause on its own because, as we can see from the little legs, it's standing on its own. And if a clause can stand on its own, that means it can be a sentence because it doesn't need anything else to hold it up. So a sentence could just be an independent clause on its own. The example that we had was I run. That is a sentence and an independent clause on its own. What about, can a sentence be a subordinate clause on its own? Have a think. If you answered no, then you are correct. A sentence cannot be a subordinate clause on its own. Because look, the subordinate clause, it doesn't have any legs. It cannot stand on its own. That's the rule about subordinate clauses. So if you just have a subordinate clause in a sentence, it does not make sense. So we have to cross this out. An example of just a subordinate clause was what we said before, which is when I run. And I can't put a full stop there because it's not the end of a sentence. We're still waiting for more information. What about, can a sentence be a subordinate clause plus an independent clause? And here you can see my independent clause is holding up my subordinate clause. Is that allowed to make a sentence? Have a think. A bit more of a tricky one this time. If you said yes, you are correct. And the reason is because even though this subordinate clause can't stand on its own, it does have a friend, an independent clause, helping it up. And that independent clause means it can be a sentence because it's still able to stand because the independent clause is helping. So an example of a sentence with a subordinate clause and independent clause would be when I run, that's my subordinate clause. We could say I feel tired. So we have two clauses here. When I run, which is a subordinate clause, and I feel tired, which is the independent clause. Both have a verb, which I will highlight in red. So run is the verb in the first one, and feel is the verb in the second one. And both have a subject, which is I and I. So both are clauses, they're different types of clauses. And when added together, they make a sentence because this independent clause is in there, making the sentence stand up. So now we know that clauses can sometimes be joined together. We need to understand what type of word helps us to join those two clauses together. And you guessed it, those are called conjunctions. Conjunctions can join two different types of clauses together or two of the same types of clauses together. But the point is, these two clauses can't join together without something in the middle that actually fastens them together. Imagine it like two people who want to join together. They need a piece of rope or a piece of tape that actually sticks them together, and that is the conjunction. So, for example, between an independent clause and an independent clause, you could have a sentence that is just one independent clause, but if you wanted to join two together, you would need a conjunction in the middle here to help make sure that they don't let go of each other and they stay attached. You also need a conjunction to join together an independent clause and a subordinate clause. And this is even more important because if you don't join them together, so the subordinate clause won't be able to stand on its own and your sentence won't make sense. So you definitely need a conjunction here. Without conjunctions, we wouldn't be able to add any clauses together, and we would only be able to have sentences that are made up of just one independent clause on its own each time. So you would have to have an independent clause and then a full stop, and then an independent clause and then a full stop. Oh, I dropped my pen. And another independent clause, and this would go on and on and on. Let's take a look what our sentences or writing would look like if we only ever used independent clauses, each on their own, to make sentences, and we didn't have any conjoined clauses. So what would a passage look like where it was just independent clause, full stop, independent clause, full stop, independent clause, full stop?
Listen to how this passage sounds when it only has simple sentences with no conjunctions. One day, Phil and Leon went to the canal. They were going fishing. There seemed to be no one else around. They chose the best place. They started to get out the rods. Then there was a loud splash. Then there was a scream. Phil and Leon looked up. They saw something moving in the water. Then they saw a hand waving. Someone had fallen in the water. As you can see, it's not very pleasant to listen to because each sentence is very short, and it kind of has this rhythm which sounds like ba-ba-ba, 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 which isn't very nice to listen to. So conjunctions would help to make our sentences a bit more elegant. They would join the clauses together so we don't have so many short and sharp sentences, and they would help us to make connections between some of the ideas. Like, was there a reason why something happened? If there was a reason, we could use the word because, for example. Let's go back to our work on conjunctions.
Here are some examples of conjunctions that could make your sentences sound much better. And this first type of conjunction you should have already learnt in Year 2. The name of this type of conjunction is called a coordinating conjunction, but you don't really need to remember that. All you need to remember is that these conjunctions, or, and, so, but, yet, and nor, are used to join two independent clauses together. So two clauses with legs together, two clauses that can stand on their own. So here's an example of two independent clauses. You have it is sunny, so we have the verb is and the subject it. It is the thing doing the verb, it is. And we have another independent clause here, I am not hot. And the verb is am, and the subject is I. If I wanted to, I could write a passage that just has those two independent clauses as sentences. It is sunny, full stop. I am not hot, full stop. But that sounds quite boring. Can we use one of these conjunctions on the board to conjoin these two independent clauses together? Have a think. It is sunny, I am not hot. What would you choose to put in there? Now, some of you have probably thought of the same one that I would put in there. I would say, it is sunny, but, and I'll put a little comma there, just before the but. It is sunny, but I am not hot. And then I would put my full stop at the end of this new sentence, which has now got two clauses in it. It's a combined sentence. Some of these conjunctions are used for simpler things, not just joining two clauses together, but sometimes when you're making lists. So you might say, this person is smart, funny, and intelligent. In that case, and is not being used to join two independent clauses together, it's just being used in a list. Similarly, you might use or in a list. You might say, I don't want pasta or pizza for dinner. So you're giving a couple of options, and you're not really using or to join two clauses together. So these two, and or, can be, and some of these other coordinating conjunctions can be used to join bits of information together in lists, for example, but they can also be used to join two independent clauses together. So they're very versatile. Make sure you remember these words. So what about conjunctions that join together a subordinate clause, so a clause that can't stand on its own, and an independent clause? Well, you'll be happy to know that actually this is quite easy, because normally these subordinating conjunctions, the conjunctions that help us to join subordinate clauses to independent clauses, are already inside the subordinate clause. For example, remember the subordinate clause we used earlier? We said, when I run, when, which is one of the subordinating conjunctions, one of the conjunctions I've written up, is already inside this subordinate clause. So you don't need to add any more conjunctions if you want to attach this subordinate clause to an independent clause. In fact, all you need to do is to put the independent clause next to the subordinate clause. And this conjunction is already doing its job. Without this conjunction, we wouldn't be able to add them together, but it's already in there, like a secret ninja. So when is the conjunction that helps us to join it together. When I run, that's a subordinate clause, I could say, I feel tired. That's what we said earlier. And then I can put a full stop at the end. This is now a sentence made up of two clauses. Now you'll notice the funny thing about these two clauses is the conjunction is actually at the beginning. And this is one of the tricky things about subordinate clauses attached to independent clauses, is sometimes the conjunction doesn't go in the middle where the two clauses would be joining or holding hands. Because it's a secret ninja conjunction, it hides here at the front, but it's actually doing its work. Because of this conjunction, this independent clause can attach to this subordinate clause. It has a very strong power. These are very powerful conjunctions.
One more note about these conjunctions. Yes, we did it this way round. When I run, I feel tired. And we learnt that sometimes the conjunction doesn't go in the middle between the two clauses. It can go at the beginning of the subordinating clause and extend its power to attach the two clauses together, even when it's quite far away at the front of the sentence. However, I don't want you to forget that you can still use it in the middle. For example, we can just rearrange this sentence to say, I feel tired when I run. We've used the exact same words, but this time we started with the independent clause, I feel tired, and then we've put the subordinate clause afterwards, when I run. And when we do that, the when, as you can see it in red, has ended up in the middle. So these subordinating conjunctions that we're learning now, they can actually go in different places depending on which order you write your sentence in.
I could even say, if, that's another conjunction on this list, if I run, I feel tired. So now you've had a look at a bunch of different conjunctions. You've got the super powerful ones that help to stick subordinate clauses to independent clauses, and you've got some coordinating conjunctions which help to stick together independent clauses to another independent clause, and they normally go in between the two clauses. I don't want you to worry too much about all the rules, because actually most of you do this automatically when you're writing anyway. The reason I'm explaining it to you is so you understand how great it is to know conjunction, because it helps you in your sentences make sentences with clauses added together in the correct way.
Now you understand what conjunctions do, we're going to have a go at doing some tasks about using conjunctions correctly. And we're just going to focus on using some of the subordinating conjunctions that we just went through. So make sure you have your pencil and paper ready. I'm going to read the instructions to you. So it says make a complex sentence. So a complex sentence is that type where there's a subordinate clause plus an independent clause. And it says use when, if, that, or because to add a subordinate clause. Please change the sentences from simple sentences to complex sentences by adding a subordinate clause to the end of each sentence. Use the conjunction at the end of each sentence to help you make a subordinate clause. So this relates to when I said that a lot of the subordinate clauses have the special conjunction inside of them. And we looked at an example like when I run. The when is already inside the subordinate clause. So the first one has been done for you. We've got the sentence that is just an independent clause of its own. Sarah got a new bike. Then it's given us the conjunction because. So we know that the subordinate clause that we're going to add has got to have the word because in it. So what I've written is Sarah got a new bike because it was her birthday. So I suggest you pause the video now and have a go at adding subordinate clauses using the conjunctions that are given in bold for each question. And you should be able to answer questions 2 to 6 if you pause the video now. And if you're playing the video again, you will see that the questions are just scrolling down, so you can see the bottom few questions, which is question 7 and 8. So in a second, once you see question 8, you can pause the video. And now you should be ready to get a parent or guardian to take a picture of your work and send it in to me. I look forward to seeing how you got on with these super tricky conjunctions. Have a lovely Wednesday, and I'll speak to you all soon.